Time and clap your hands for the wonderful, illustrious Myra McNair.
Thank you, Pastor. Thanks for having me today.
I am so glad that you're here today. So I sent out the list of questions. So I'm just going to hop right into it, unless you have a disclaimer you want to give or anything like that. Any infomercials now or no?
Not right now.
Okay, you can keep the music playing lightly in the background. What'd you say, Tori? There we go. There we go. So the first question we have today is, how do you support someone who, nope, that's not the first one. Here's the first one. Being single, I have felt anxiety about both getting into a relationship as well as some anxiety about not being in a relationship. How do I get to a place of not feeling anxiety about either staying single or getting into a relationship?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question. I would say, there are a lot of reasons why people choose to be single or married. And sometimes it's just preference, right, on what you prefer, what kind of lifestyle, because we know that when you're married, life changes for you. And then there can be other reasons like your own family and how you were raised. And there might be reasons why you're really either shying away from that because maybe your own parents weren't, happy in their marriage, or maybe there was infidelity or things like that. So I would say lean into where that anxiety is coming from and do some exploration, whether it's with a therapist or just even on your own, exploring why you don't want to or why you do want to be single. And I would say there's no wrong reason. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be single and staying single, and there's nothing wrong with maybe desiring not to be single. I just know, for me, when I was raised in the church, I don't know what it was like for you, it felt like you weren't supposed to be single. Like you were looking forward to the next thing. And I look back at that time when I was single and I'm like, that was wonderful. It's actually a really wonderful time in my life that I don't feel like the church celebrated a lot, my singlehood. It was always desired, what is that like to be married or, have kids? But, it was great. I could travel when I wanted to. I could do things in the church when I wanted to. Now it's I have a lot of other people to consider before I even step outside the door to do anything. And so I think, just being grateful and enjoying those different periods of your time and different times of your life. And just really letting that sink in and enjoy those different seasons, because seasons change,
It's kind of like when you, have you ever gone to the grocery store? Maybe I'm the only weirdo who has done this. But you don't want to spend a lot of money, so you go to the grocery store to get lunch meat, but you don't need a whole half a pound. You need a fourth of a pound. And they put 3 slices on there, and then they look at you is that all? Yeah, that's all I need. I don't need the whole thing, right? They kind of try to make you feel weird. You know what I'm talking about, right? They be like, what, you came all the way up here just for 2 slices? Yes, that's all I need today for a sandwich. You are not going to pressure me, okay, into buying what I don't need. And sometimes, not only in religious circles, but in society, when you're single, it's you're incomplete. When the truth of the matter is, when God made Adam and when he made Eve, he made them both complete. They were already complete when he made them. And when they came together, they just maximized their power. So God does not make incomplete things without question. So the next question is, I have worried about finding and receiving a job in the career field that I dream of getting into that is right for me. How do I get from a place of feeling fear about this topic to get to a place where I have belief and confidence and trust that God has something beautiful for me in my life and in my career field?
Yeah, I love that question, because I think, sometimes we look at our goals or we look at our dream and we think that's too big, that's a lot, and then we lose that confidence. And I would say lean into it, lean into what that goal, what that dream is, and then rewind and say, okay, what steps do I need to take? Right? And break it down into small steps. Okay, I need to go back to school. Okay, how do I do that? Let's do this part first. Kind of have a map or a plan of where you want to go. just so that doesn't seem so intimidating and your anxiety just isn't so increased when you're thinking about that.
Okay, wonderful. Let me move this mic stand up. Come on, I have something. It's a great point.
So anxiety is when you're, I'm going to give you some of the symptoms of what it could look like, kind of like an ordinary day for someone with anxiety. So sometimes it can manifest in not getting enough sleep, like you can't sleep at night. There's social anxiety, so sometimes it's I don't want to leave the house, I don't want to be around people, and kind of having the ruminations of thoughts, right? Those thoughts going over and over again, the patterns. It can look like a stomach ache. I say it usually manifests a lot in people with a stomach ache. And it is, like you said, it is having like a lot of fear, right? A lot of worry. Just worried about this, worried about that. And some anxieties can be kind of like around certain things. Like I gave the example of social anxiety. There's anxiety around speaking in front of people, where people literally start stuttering and just can't even get the words out when they're in front of people. So there's different anxieties, that different people have.
Wonderful. So if anybody else has a question, I just want to make sure that they can get the audio on the YouTube. So there's a mic right there. But the next question is, how do you support someone who believes delusional ideas and makes accusations that they know are untrue?
Yeah, so that question is really interesting to me as well, because I feel like if someone's having delusions, they may not know what they're doing. So they may, I think the question said they know isn't true.
Yeah, how do you support someone who believes delusional ideas and makes accusations that they know are untrue? Let me just chime in. When I first read this question, I said, oh, this is talking about Packers fans, because they think they're going to get to the Super Bowl. But then I said, it's probably more serious. Sorry, it's probably more serious than that. But yeah, it says that they believe delusional ideas and makes accusations that they know are untrue.
Yeah, I would say we may not know where this person might be coming from, because there are, different mental health conditions where people don't understand what they're doing. And just a couple that come to my mind: bipolar 1, if someone's really manic, and there's delusions with that, mental health illness, as well as schizophrenia. And so I would need to know more about kind of what's going on in that question. But I would say a couple of things is sometimes people don't want help, and it is really hard. And I would say there's a lot of different gaps that we have in the U.S. For people to get mental health help when they are kind of in a manic state or having really strong delusions. And it could be hard on friends and loved ones. So I would say the one thing is also really protecting yourself, that you're not a doormat for anybody, right? So if you need to remove yourself from someone who is making accusations about you, that is okay to do. But also know, and I would need to know more about the situation, is that if it is something like schizophrenia or bipolar 1, those things are really they come in episodes. And so sometimes people can be really well, and then when they're having an episode, they're not well. And so sometimes having those conversations when people are more well, it will be more received than when someone's in a manic state or having a schizophrenic episode.
Kind of a follow-up to that, which is not on here, but when you thought about it, I thought that other people in the audience might be thinking about this. What happens if you don't know if the person will be safe if you leave them alone, right?
Yeah. Yep. And so I've seen families be really, really creative, and it's really hard, because this is where people will say well, it's really good to have kind of like that police interaction, because if you get so much of that, then you can kind of make a case where they can get court ordered for medications, right? Or court ordered to get some help, and then that way they can get stabilized. For people of color, that's really dangerous when you're talking about getting police involvement, right? And so a lot of families they're just in this really bad dilemma of like what to do. At our clinic, we have helped families, and when it's not like a traditional way to help people, right? I would say if you go to an ordinary mental health clinic, most mental health clinics are going to be like, we can't help you unless this person is registered with our clinic. And we have found in some cases with our crisis programming to really help and get help, to help the family for that person to get help, and to kind of really bypass the whole police
intervention in the first place.
Intervention. Yep.
So I have additional information here. It says bipolar type 1, so that's their diagnosis. And to clarify the question, it says this person is making damaging allegations against family members.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's so common with bipolar 1. It's one of the criteria in the DSM is that people really have like when they're in the manic state, they have really grandiose thoughts. They also have like really strong delusions, and it's something that I hear all the time with bipolar 1 is that there are accusations that are made. And I've worked with people that have bipolar 1 but are medicated, and once they're stable, they are so embarrassed and sad of the things that they said when they were in a manic state. And it makes it really, really hard because friends and family usually don't want to be around that person anymore, even once they're medicated, because they're like, you've done so much harm. You've done so much harm. You've made really, really, we're talking about like sexual abuse accusations, murder, like someone murdered someone. Like these are the kind of things that I've heard, like really, really, like just kind of like outlandish accusations. And so I would say that's where family counseling would really be helpful. And knowing kind of what your boundaries, what do you want your boundaries to be with this person? If they're medicated, they're not going to be making those accusations anymore. The problem is that we know that people can get off their medications. And so that's where I think each family member needs to figure out what boundaries you want to have.
And this is a direct follow-up to that. It says, how do you support family members who have partners that they don't believe are sick? In fact, others are the problem in their mind, but they are the ones that really need help.
And so that's where we can talk about boundaries some more, right? And we don't get to choose our families, right? Family is family, and I think that's what makes us all kind of be awesome humans, right? Is that we grow from these interactions with family members. Some are really great, some are not so great. But you as an adult, you get to choose kind of like where you want to have different family members in your life. And I'm not saying like throw away family, right? That's not what I'm saying. But what are some of the healthy boundaries for you? And that's going to look different for everyone. I can't say what that's going to look like for everyone. But that's where therapy and counseling could come in, where you can really talk about all those different details. How do you interact with family members that may be in this situation that the question talked about? I think it's really important to do.
If you feel like the person doesn't respect your boundaries, how do you like reestablish those?
That's good. Yep, you have to stick to it. I would say you'd have to, just because someone doesn't respect a boundary doesn't mean that you have to change.
Say that one more time.
Just because someone doesn't respect a boundary doesn't mean that you have to change.
Yeah, I think that's important to know, right? Especially when we're talking about family, right? Because we can feel a sense of guilt for saying, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do this, or I stop here, right? But the boundaries, even though it feels like it's hurting, it's actually helping.
Absolutely.
Even though it might not feel that way in the moment.
Well, relationship is two people, right? And the interactions that we create is not just one-sided. So what we allow is giving someone permission to interact with you the same way that they have been always, right? And so if one person changes that, even, it will change the interactions and the dynamics within the relationship. And we see this in couples as well, right? In couples therapy, is that even if one person can make some changes, it will then change that interaction or the dynamic between the couple.
I agree. One of my favorite sayings used to be, what you allow, you encourage, right? So if you allow it to continue, whether you say it with your mouth or not, you're telling this person, you can continue to do this because nothing's going to change on my end. And we can't control them, to Myra's point, but we can control ourselves. Abuse can be emotional, mental, and verbal, as well as physical. How do you differentiate among these, and how do you support those who are suffering from these attacks?
It's a really, I would say every family and every person that comes in our door, there are certain safety protocols and safety interventions. So for an example, if a couple is seeing us, we have a really strong rule. If there's domestic violence, we can't do couples therapy because it's really dangerous. Like something that one person, one of the partners might say in couples therapy could be brought back home, and it could be really dangerous for that person. Also, if there's like infidelity going on, as we're doing couples therapy, that needs to stop as well. So we have like some safety rules. I would say though, to differentiate between the psychological and physical abuse, if someone's seeing us individually, that's very different, and we want to make sure that there's always like a safety plan. But we don't encourage necessarily or make people like leave situations.
Right.
So there is always that power of choice. And also, and I'll just, I think we all know it's mostly women that are victims of these kind of abuses. And also, it's not always so easy for people to get out. And there's financial reasons or kid reasons. But we want to make sure that we have a safety plan intact for that person. So when they are ready to leave, they know what to do and they know resources. I would also like to just kind of point out, just because we're talking about this subject, is that a lot of these kind of abuses start really, really young. And it starts with a lot of teenagers and really abusive relationships. And I would say the emotional one I see a lot with our teenagers. Where young girls are coming in and they're saying, my boyfriend won't let me wear certain things. I have to wear my hair. He wants my hair to look like this. It's like the constant control. He doesn't want me talking to other boys at school. And so to really look for that at really young ages, and to talk to both our boys and girls around this subject, to talk to our boys around what is this toxic masculinity that we're seeing, and really start talking about that at a young age, and also with our girls, right? And that they have power over their bodies, they have power over, their time, and that no one should be controlling them.
Right. Yeah, that's so important, because if you wait until they're an adult, they've already had 15, 20 years of mastering these kinds of abuses. Yeah. How do you get an adult in treatment that isn't able to see that they need, I'm sure you get this a lot, that isn't able to see that they need it when they are actively cutting themselves or expressing suicidal ideations, but they don't have a knife or weapon in their hand to commit the act when you call for help? So I'm going to dive into this a little more, because I think just for clarity. So you have an adult that is trying to harm themselves, right? But it seems like by the time you call for support, whether that be the crisis line or 911, the situation, I shouldn't say the situation, but they don't have the weapon in their hand actively, and they say, I'm fine, or it was just a moment. How do you help that person to get into treatment?
I mean, I think the biggest thing you can do is really just encourage people to get help, right? But not in a way like, you need help, you know?
Right, you crazy. That's probably not the best thing to say.
You need help,
right.
No, not like that. But just really encouraging the person, like, it's okay to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. I'll go with you. What do you need, for support to go get help, and encourage people in that way. I do want to make a distinction between the cutting and the like
Suicidal.
self-harm and suicide, that those are two totally different things as well. And both can be concerning, but cutting is a little different because it's not really, people associate it with suicide because you are doing self-harm, but it's very different, and there's different reasons why people do it. So people usually do the cutting for kind of like that release, right? There's certain stress or certain traumas that they're trying to cope with, and that actually ends up being a coping mechanism. So there are some cases where people like only have cut like maybe once or twice in their life and they stop, but the majority of people who cut then usually keep doing that as a coping strategy. And if we look at the cycle of cutting, what we have found is that there's usually extreme guilt and shame that comes after doing it. So they have the release that happens, and then there's like this really extreme guilt and shame. And so making sure that we're not adding more of that guilt and shame to people, but that we're encouraging them to get help, right? Let's talk about it. If you talk to someone, there's some other coping strategies that you can use instead of the cutting. But really not shaming the person for doing it. And then the suicide, like even if someone's having thoughts or ideation, they don't need to have a weapon in their hand to get the resources or help. You should be calling a hotline. There's sometimes hospitalization is really helpful, where people can then get like that stabilization. They can get on some meds. They can get the support they need with talking with people. There's support groups when they're hospitalized. So that's what I would encourage for that.
If someone is cutting themselves or utilizing a unhealthy coping mechanism, how do you get them to divert to more helpful or supportive ways?
Yeah, I would say really encouraging them to talk to a counselor, because in counseling, it's not going to happen overnight even. So it's not like something that you can be like, well, why don't you try this or why don't you try that? And they're just going to all of a sudden like go to something different at home. Because there's a lot of things underneath that. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be past traumas, it could be like different family dynamics that's going on in the home. And the reason why I'm saying in the home and kind of talking about it like it's a young person, what research tells us is usually young people or young adults that do cut. So I would say, like, having that counselor is really going to be helpful, because the counselor is going to be able to go a little bit deeper, and then from there talk about some other healthy coping strategies, and then also safety, right? Because what we found with a lot of youth is when they're cutting, they're using whatever they can in the house to cut, and sometimes they're like dirty objects or not like really not safe objects. And so a therapist can really do a lot of psychoeducation with that young person around that.
And from a parent's perspective, if you have a son or a daughter that's cutting, whether they're grown or under the age of 18, one of the most important things that we found effective in our home with supporting children as they grow older, right, even if they're outside of the house, is keeping the lines of communication open, like she said. And this isn't only for mental health, this is with anything, right? When you've raised a child a certain way and they do things that they know you disagree with, they already have guilt about it. Matter of fact, I would dare to say they already have shame about it. So to shame them, you're actually doing more harm, because you're not pushing them away, but you're creating a greater chasm, right? So that when they do struggle with these things, instead of going to you who can be like, listen, this is the best way, how you should deal with it, they go to their friends, or they go to TikTok and they say, oh yeah, well, I met somebody online, right? And the trust they should be giving you as a mom or as a dad or as an auntie or as an uncle or as a godmom or as a trusted whomever you may be, they turn to somebody else because you weaponized that shame, instead of saying, you know what, I love you and I support you, and showing them, right? Because when you feel loved and supported, you're more likely to listen, right? So even if you don't agree or don't understand, being there to listen allows them to feel heard. And that goes a long way in my personal experience, not only being a parent, but working in mental health. I think those are some of the things that I found helpful. How do you support grown children that are in crisis, out of town or out of state, and connect them with care? And the second part to that question is anesis an option?
Well, anesthetist wouldn't be an option, unfortunately, because even though there is telehealth, Wisconsin is a state that hasn't approved for us to do mental health services across state lines. Some of that's been changing though since COVID and the increase of telehealth being used, but not in Wisconsin, unfortunately. So you would need to find a licensed mental health professional within that state that your child lives in. I would say it would be very challenging, on how to help someone through, across state lines. It's hard even in Madison, I know, for parents that are like working with their adult children with mental health, illness that has been untreated. It's been extremely hard within the same city. So I would say, like, if you yourself have your own counselor, that's something that maybe you could like problem solve, or even have like a family meeting with your family. Like maybe there's other family members that do live in that same city or state, where you guys can come up with a plan or an intervention. What's going to happen if A, B, or C goes wrong? Who's going to be there to do what? Right? I think would be a place to start. Good place to start.
And even though I'm not the one with the license in marriage family therapy degree up here, I do think it's important also what you model, right? If every time you as a parent have an issue and you turn inward, you're actually telling them to do something that you're not practicing, right? And they might not, if you had a parent like my parents, you're not gonna say it to your mom or daddy face, but you thinking, you telling me to do something you ain't even doing. You telling me to get help and you didn't get help. You telling me not to cut myself, but you was beating me. Come on, you know what I'm saying? And telling me to beat my kids, right? So you're telling me to get support with something that you're not getting support with.
And Alan, that's one of our biggest, like, I don't know if you've noticed this at, Anesis, but we talk about this a lot, is that, I think a lot of parents sometimes, they love our work, and then they also at the same time kind of get mad at us because we have the philosophy that if your kid is coming to see us, and we're not so much talking about adult kids, in this example, but kids under the age of 18, is that we require for parents, a lot of our treatment modalities we use require parents to come in every other session. So we're doing one, as many times as we see your kid, we see you as the parent. And a lot of clinics, they don't look at it that way. They look at it as, I'm just going to bring my kid here. The kid is the problem. And we're really seeing like, no, like it's a whole family system thing, right? That we don't want to take place of parents either. Certainly. Is that we want to work collaboratively with parents and work alongside them, not, not have like good communication or anything like that with parents. So it is really a family thing, right? That needs to be kind of like looked at, because there's interactions, right? And there's sometimes a lot of hurt that people carry within families, and it takes a whole family to heal.
Certainly. And it takes multiple mechanisms, right? If you've ever been to the doctor and you've been diagnosed with something, it doesn't have anything to do with mental health, with physical health, diabetes. They're not just gonna say, hey, you gotta change what you eat. They're gonna say, you gotta change what you eat. You gotta drink more water. You gotta find self-care. You've gotta exercise, right? But sometimes we think, oh man, I'm just gonna drop off my partner or my spouse or my kid at the therapist and they're gonna do it all. No, you need to bring them to therapy. Let me just do an infomercial. You need to bring them to church, right? You need to show them self-care. I think the first week of this series I was talking about, there should not be a 24-hour period that passes that you don't do some form of self-care. Now, unless, you got a hedge fund, you might not be able to do retail therapy, right, every day. But there should be something you do to identify that in yourself and help those practices to be manifest. Because sometimes we think, I'm just going to do this and this is going to fix it. We think that all with our lives or with our goals. We think, oh man, my life is okay, but if I get more money, then it'll be better. We think if I stop doing, it's not a one fix. It's all of it. All of it is interconnected. So I think it's important to know that and to bear that and to not expect one thing to fix it all. When I was growing up in church, like Myra was saying, the church was the one-stop shop. Therapy was like a curse word. You know, like you say therapy, they start slinging oil. Come on, they start, casting out demons. It's like you said something you wasn't supposed to say.
No, it's
you,
so true.
You say, yeah, I'm taking medication. You taking medication? All you need to do is drink a teaspoon of blessed oil. That was the philosophy, because they didn't understand that all of it worked together. We're not villains, right? We're colleagues, right? The spiritual works with the mental health and works with the physical. Let me stop being repetitive, but because I could go on and on about that. But anyways, so another question is, if a person doesn't consent to hospitalization with suicidal ideations, what do you do? They're over the age of 18. And they're over the age of 18.
Ask them what else they need for support. Sometimes you yourself can call a hotline, for somebody. If they don't want to call, you can just call, like if you live with someone, like, and just say, so-and-so, my kid, my sister, whoever it is having suicidal thoughts. But I would say also there's some difference. So when we talk about suicidal ideation, Alan, Pastor.
You can call me Alan. Everybody does.
We're talking about having like the thoughts of suicide. And that what we have found, like what research tells us, is like super, super common. I'm sure all of us in this room at one point have had even just a thought that came in our mind about suicide, right? Or just even a thought like, I just wish this would be over. I just want to end this, right? That's a little bit more common. But then we're talking about like, do you have a plan? Right? Now that's different. Like a lot of us are like, well, I thought it, but there's no way I would ever do it.
Right.
Like I never had a plan or anything like that. So those are two very different things. So sometimes people will write, or kids will write in their journals things, and parents will get really,
Right.
Or find letters or something, and they'll get really concerned. And it's fine, and it's great to be concerned, but having just like that, like what you said earlier, that open communication, right? And to be able to talk about anything, where your kids can talk to you about anything. Now, like I said, having a plan is a little different. That's where things start getting serious.
Right.
An attempt is even more serious, okay? So that means that someone took like medication, or they took some kind of weapon, and they try to jump off of some, like attempts they're gonna get hospitalized, right? Like by that's the hospital's gonna find out because there was an attempt, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to point out that there are different language and situations that we talk about as therapists. And a therapist and someone at a hotline can then give an assessment to kind of differentiate, okay, is this just ideation, or does this person have an actual plan? All right? And if they have a plan, you need to know what it is, because then you, as their safe person, can really make sure that there's a safety plan in place. So if it includes like knives or a gun, you want to make sure those things aren't in your house, or those things are super locked up, right? So that's why it's so important to have that communication, because even if they get treatment, when they get home, there needs to be a safety plan in place.
What would you say to parents or people? What would you say to people who are like, I want to check in on my family or my kids about suicidal ideation, or my cousin or whatever, but I don't want to put the thought in their mind? If they're like, well, I want to ask, but if they seem okay, I don't want to ask because I don't want to make them, give them any ideas. What would you say to people who are afraid to address it because of that?
This is such a controversial topic.
Okay.
And because we've seen it, I don't know how many people heard of the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why.
Anybody seen it? Raise your hand if you saw it.
Or even heard of it. So it's a Netflix show that they showed, and it was supposed to, what they were trying to do is not encourage kids and teenagers to think about suicide in the way where they were going to actually attempt it or have a plan. And what they saw is that numbers actually increased.
Wow.
Of suicide of this. And so some people are like, well, if you talk about it, you're putting the idea. And it's no, you're not. It's how you talk about it, okay? So if we're not gonna romanticize it, right? We're gonna have like real conversations around it. hey, what are you and your friends, is there education or school? Do you guys talk about suicide, or however you want to bring it up to your kid? But you want to bring it up. There's nothing wrong with talking about it. And like, hey, if you ever feel like you can't talk to someone, or you feel like, life is too hard, like you can come talk to me. I want you to know you can talk to me about anything. There's nothing that is off the table. And that's like the real important thing.
And you're normalizing the conversation.
Yes.
You're making it so when they feel this way, they don't have to wonder whether it would be okay to talk to you. Let me give you a quick example about this. So you all know that we lost my mother. It was a month yesterday. And one of the things that I was talking to my therapist about was, she was like, don't forget your kids. She's like, when you guys are doing stuff for Thanksgiving and for Christmas, don't forget the kids. And she gave me some very helpful tools. And she was like, so for example, if you guys go around and share stories about Nana or memories about your mom, make sure you let the kids know too, because kids can be afraid of bringing it up because they think you're gonna get sad or you're gonna get mad or it's gonna catch you off guard or whatever. So if you normalize the conversation, when they feel sad, they will be less likely to turn inward. They'll be like, oh, well, mom and dad have talked about this, or auntie, we've talked about this. So when you open up the door, you're saying you're welcome to come to me. This is why it's important for us as parents to have as many conversations first as we can, because when whoever is first is who you trust often, right? The last quick story. I used to work at a dean at a high school, and sex is a touchy subject with parents, and there was a whole group of kids that would be in the hallway, and one day I came up to them and I said, what are y'all talking? They were like, we arguing, debating. I said, what are y'all debating about? They were like, we talking about pregnancy. I'm like, this is like ninth graders. I'm like, what do y'all know about pregnancy? And they're like, I'm trying to tell them that you cannot get pregnant if you have sexual intercourse standing up. I said, what in the world? I said, where my belt? Well, who have you? I was just joking. I didn't say that. But I was thinking, I said, where did you hear that from? And they started talking about, well, she told me this and she told me this. They're talking about teenagers. So they decided, because the friends opened up the conversation about sexuality, that the friend was the expert. But if mom would have opened up the conversation or dad would have opened up the conversation, it would have been different. But if you let Lil Wayne open up the conversation, come on. If you let Cardi B open up the conversation, it's going to be a different conversation, okay? Sorry, I had to go on that soapbox there.
And Pastor, where we're seeing that a lot is the TikTok.
Right.
Because there's a whole, you could
there's self-diagnoses and everything. Right.
Yep. And so we're seeing a huge increase. And so there's some good things around it, is that we're seeing a lot of kids that are so ready for therapy, and they're coming in, they're like, I know I have general anxiety disorder, and they're coming and they know, or they think they know what they have because of TikTok.
Right.
It's very different when we were kids, right? Like, I don't think I knew anything about mental health when I was a kid growing up. These kids know about mental health. I mean, it's us as adults and parents, we have to get really with the program as far as talking about this, because kids are so open and they're making videos about it and they're sharing it. It's like a very open, it's just, they know all the language.
And they're diagnosing you. Oh yeah, my mom's bipolar.
Yes, they are. Yeah. They are. They are.
Yeah.
But some of the downfall on that is, you really do need a mental health professional to diagnose, okay?
Correct.
Because it's normal to have days of kind of low mood. It's normal to have some worry. And so what we're seeing is that kids, because of the TikToks, they are thinking that they have all of these diagnoses where it's actually a normal level.
Right.
And I think, as well as just being Americans in general, is we're taught to be happy all the time.
Right.
We have like this idea of like, like everything should be like our social media Instagram page. Right. And that's not what life is, right? And it's so normal, like, to just wake up and be like, ugh, I'm just not having a good day, right? And then you figure out some coping skills and strategies throughout your day to make it, right? And then the next day is good.
Right.
Well, that's not depression. That doesn't meet criteria that you would need to be in therapy all the time for it, or that you would need medication for that, right? But if you're looking at TikTok, you might think, oh, I,
Right.
I have depression.
Right. It's like when you get on WebMD and you be like,
Yeah.
oh man, I got all of these. I got glaucoma. You just see three of the things. You like, I got glaucoma. Come on up, Ryan. I think it's on. Matt, is this microphone? Okay.
Do you recognize mental health issues or a crisis as opposed to your ups and downs of your daily emotion, a bad run, a bad season, and if you start to see that it's going on for an extended period of time, can it be cut off? Is mental health something that you can say, okay, I recognize I'm going down this path, boom, I'm gonna do this art, this more water, more sleep, what you talked about in the first week? Or is it something that, no, you are chemically predisposed to or conditioning yourself through these repeated thoughts that you're on the road and now it's something that you live with? So I'm really curious about where in our, in our journey does mental health become something that is a legitimate thing?
It's such a great question. So I would say almost every criteria in the DSM, the very last criteria to actually meet a mental health diagnosis is going to say an impairment in daily functioning, okay? So you could have some of these different criteria, right? And you would need to meet all the criteria. So you need to meet all the criteria in depression, all the criteria, or certain, when I say all, sometimes they'll say, you need to have 4 of the criteria. Right. So that's what I mean by all the criteria. But at the end, it's gonna say impairment to your daily functioning, right? So that means school, work, it could be relationships. So meaning that there's going to be something different in what you do every day. There's gonna be some impairment. Okay, at work I used to be able to work like this. I can't focus. I'm late all the time. I don't pay attention during the meetings. I can't talk to my coworkers the way I used to. Other people are noticing that I'm not as productive. In my relationship, it's showing up because I'm not doing things around the house. I'm not, I can't even eat dinner with my family. I just want to lay in the bed, things like that. And so those are just some example. But that part is really important because we are going to have, parts of our life that is just it's not always on the mountaintop, right? Our mood is going to be low. And it's okay to get therapy, even just during those times, right? Just to kind of assess, is this something serious, or just even that you need more support during that time? I would say we live in Wisconsin, and we need to pay attention to how we act during different seasons, right? If wintertime comes around and your mood is really low every single winter, there's a condition for that, right? And we're talking about that seasonal affective disorder. So it's, vitamin D, helps with those. A light box, not having access to sun all the time, it does affect our mood. We see that suicide rates and depression is higher in Alaska where they have less sun. We know that this is correlated to mental health. So don't ignore those things. It's okay to get support during those times as well.
Certainly. My biggest question right now is, how do you navigate your way through grief and deal with the sadness that comes in waves after a loss?
Yeah. And it's, I think our culture tells us there's a time to deal with grief. And what we know is that grief doesn't have a timeline. There's no it ends at this time. And again, I think our American culture has a lot to do with some of the reason why we really do struggle with grief the way we do here is because we're not taught that it's really normal to just have that a long period of grief, right? We're taught you have the funeral, you take a couple of days off work, and then you're supposed to just be back at it, right? And then there's other cultures where it's like it's a whole week of just like everyone's just mourning with you and grieving with you. And even though that doesn't stop there, it's just a very different way to look at like how to go through grief. But I would say lean into it, right? And to really normalize those feelings and those waves, and to do something to honor that person or honor the relationship you had with that person that you're grieving. I would say that question two is really broad grief in general, and people, we are all going through grief to a certain extent with COVID.
Break it down.
We have lost so much. Kids have lost so much. I would say for a lot of people, it's been like young and old people to me that have really, really struggled the most, because young people have kind of lost those rituals, right? Rites of passage, to whether it was like prom, graduation, going to your first day of kindergarten. Some people were going up to the screen. What's that, right? So also for parents, that was like a lot of grief. Like they're just a lot of sadness of missing out on those really important moments for your kids.
Birthday parties.
Birthday parties, funerals. A lot of people that first year of COVID, there was no funerals.
Right.
People weren't getting together to even grieve, right? So I think like we're all going through a lot of grief right now. People, I think, I talked to some people and they still haven't had holidays together. And we're, going into our like second year,
yeah.
and they still aren't doing Thanksgiving because, the variants of COVID and everything. So we're going to be experiencing grief for a while, and it's going to come up in waves. And to really normalize it, lean into it, journal, celebrate the person, do some celebrations late. Maybe we need to do kindergarten and graduation celebrations late, but do whatever you need to do to kind of honor that in the situation that it is.
Yeah. If you have to leave, I completely understand, but I want to give you guys an opportunity, if anybody has any additional questions, to just come up to the mic and ask your questions. I think I've asked all the ones that were on here. Oh, there's another one on here about anesis. So if you have any additional follow-up questions, you can just come to the mic, and you can go ahead from there. One of the questions is, what insurances what are all the insurances that anesis accepts? Is it on the website?
It is on our website. I can name some. I may not cover all of them. So we take Quartz, Group Health, Dane, Blue Cross Blue Shield, WPS, Alliance, MHS, all the Badger Cares, and all the Badger Cares with the HMOs attached to it.
Okay, so what if someone can't pay for their therapy and they want to pay you in food stamps? Is that a viable option? I was just silly. I was just being silly.
Legally, I don't think we could take the food stamp.
Just make the meal, okay? Just make the meal and drop it off, and we'll work out something.
We do have a scaling fee for those people who can, that are paying out of pocket that don't have insurance. So we do have that, and then and then there are some people that can, afford just
Right.
The price out of pocket, and just you can do therapy in a creative way within your budget. Like if it's once a month and you have to pay out of pocket, or it might be like skipping other things like going out to eat, for a session, But I would say try to do the scaling fee. It's just like a form that you fill out, and then they kind of do like the math behind it. There's like a algorithm or whatever for it.
Right.
And then I would say we haven't really turned anyone away based on that. We try to work with people based on that scaling fee.
Right.
So
And that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And in terms of there's also like grief support groups, right? All kinds of support groups, not only grief support groups that are free. AODA, so if you know somebody who's having challenges with substance abuse or substance use, right? You have those groups that are available for free, right? So there are resources that are available for free that we can utilize or better understand. But one of the things I want to say, and then I just want to have Myra say a word about self-care, and then if you would be so kind to, just say a prayer for us and our families at the intersection of mental and spiritual health, is that we have to model these things, right? It's so important for us to model these things, because when we model them, we're opening up the conversation in our children, in our spouses, in our cousins, and normalize what we're doing, right? I try to say as often as I can that I'm in therapy, not because I want to be. I don't say I'm in therapy to be seen, but I want to be seen in therapy. Let me say that again. I don't say I'm in therapy to be seen, but I want to be seen in therapy. In other words, I want people to know that it's not that something has to be wrong with you to go to therapy, right? We all have challenges, we all have issues, and there's a such thing as preventative care, right? You want to utilize all of the things that are available to you, and we have, especially in Black and brown communities, we have to destigmatize these things and make them more normal and more common. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. So I don't see anybody moving to the mic. So like I said, Myra's going to say a little something about self-care, and then I'll ask us all to stand and we'll dismiss in prayer. If there's someone who you're like, ooh, I really wish they were here today, right? Sometimes we listen to this information, we're like, ooh, my sister need that. Ooh, my cousin need, ooh, I wish my mama was here right now because she need to hear this. Before you forward the link to your mama, before you text your cousin and say they missed it today, make sure that you are evaluating the information that applies to you directly, that applies to your mental health, that applies to your spiritual health. Make sure you're doing what you need to do for yourself, because oftentimes we can be that person that we're like, oh man, I wish they were here. And it's like, yeah, they need it, but you need it too. They need the conversation, but you need the conversation too. They need the support, but you need the support too. And the more we become whole, the easier it is to help other people around us become whole. So go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes we really make self-care hard and we overthink it, right? And it's not, the bubble baths are great. Massages are great. Getting our nails done, it's great. That's not what we mean by self-care when we're talking about it in therapy, though. Those are great self-care things, though. So self-care is, how you are. Do you have like a spiritual self-care? We're gonna look at mentally self-care, some physical self-care. So it could be walking, exercising, and we're gonna look around the social self-care. Who are you around? Are you around people who are discouraging, tearing you down, always saying negative comments? I had one friend, and she was always telling me about another friend who was always talking bad about her hair and about this and about that. And I said, what kind of friend are you hanging out with? I was like, it just sounds like every time when you're done hanging out with this friend, you feel like, you just feel horrible. So self-care would be surrounding yourself around people who are uplifting, right? So, going to church is a part of self-care, right? This is a
You're
spiritual,
welcome.
this is a part of community. A lot of people don't have community, or they don't have any peer support or natural support systems. A lot of people that I see, and I would say even with people who are dealing with substance abuse, one of the biggest indicators when I have a client that I know they're gonna, yes, they are gonna get through this, is having community support. And I know this is gonna sound really crazy. They've done research with rats, and I know, bear with me here, around cocaine, all right, and having access to cocaine or community of rats. I know that sounds crazy. They will pick community over the cocaine. When we talk about substance abuse, a lot of people do not have community support or a really good core of people in their community to support them. It's one of the biggest indicators of recovery is to have that. So that is huge part of self-care, is finding a good group of people to be around. It's so huge. And then, yes, of all those other things like bubble baths and all that, that's great. But I would say the biggest self-care is like having those healthy boundaries around family, finding the community, having a spiritual life, doing some physical things, right? What you eat affects your mood too. Things like that. And being out in nature, which I know is another thing, I would say in the BIPOC community, has really been stripped from a lot of communities in the U.S. And so finding what is your thing out in nature that you can do, because that fresh air, the sun, the vitamin D, all those things are really going to help.
Yeah, very, very good. Let's stand, and then we'll dismiss in prayer. And some practices that I shared on my live yesterday that are very helpful for self-care, right? When you are having a moment, right, and you're like, ooh, I need some spiritual self-care, it's not best to just toss the Bible up and just hope that it opens up to a scripture that you need, right? There's a joke that somebody told me one time. He was like, man, I was really going through a mental health crisis. And he said he thumbed through the Bible and he opened it up. And it was the verse where Judas committed suicide. And he's like, what is going on? So he tossed it up again and it fell open again. And then next verse he said, and whatever thou doest, do it quickly. So he was like, it's a joke. True story though. So he's like, man, like that's not how it works, right? So if you know you have bouts with loneliness, when you're not having a bout with loneliness, write down some scriptures that encourage you that you don't have to be alone. If you know you have bouts with depression or suicide or being overwhelmed, find verses in the Bible that speak to exactly what you are going through. It's not different than what you do with Netflix, right? You ever open up Netflix and you be like, oh, I want to watch something, but you be like, I don't want to watch nothing sad, right? You're not going to open up Hulu and if you're having a terrible day, watch The Handmaid's Tale, okay? Probably not a good idea. No shade to The Handmaid's Tale, great show. But right, you say, I feel like laughing, or I feel like watching something funny, or I feel like watching something that reminds me of my family. The same thing has to be done with the Bible. That's the best way to use it. So I'm going to have Myra dismiss us in prayer, but before we do that, can we just give her a wonderful round of applause for coming today, and just excellent for everything that you shared. And I just want you to pray for our families, for our mental health, for our spiritual health, especially during this holiday time that can be a huge challenge for some of us and even our children, right? Maybe they have been diagnosed, maybe they haven't, maybe we're afraid to have these conversations, but I just want you to pray for us.
Heavenly Father, God, we're just so grateful. We're grateful for life. We are grateful for everybody that is in here. We are grateful for strength, and we're grateful that you care about us and you care about every aspect about us, our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health. And we just ask you, God, just to continue to be with us this week, be with us during the holidays. Help us and everyone who may be alone during this time. Help us find community. Help us to reach out for support when we need it, and take away any shame or guilt that may be around that. We ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much for coming. We'll see you next Sunday. Matt, you can turn up the music. Thank you guys.